Over the years, it seems that rock climbing has gone from this to this.
For one of her competitors.
There we go.
Oh my goodness.
Oh man, the crowd goes wild.
And a lot of climbers are not happy about it.
Modern bouldering makes a big harm on my body. It's not healthy for me. If there wasn't the Olympics, maybe I wouldn't be competing, you know.
Explosive, dynamic movements have taken over the competition climbing scene, leading to many climbers calling it glorified parkour. But when did this change happen, and why? And what about dynos? Has climbers screaming, "No!" Thank you, Aussie Climbing Stuff, for that beautiful intro. A big round of applause, everybody. Now, historically, climbing has been a tale of man versus rock. You want respect from the village elder? You want the baddest bitch in the village? You gotta send that village V2. Standards were a lot lower back then. But it wasn't until 1492 that we saw significant change in the world of rock climbing when Antoine de Ville climbed Mont Aiguille. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing any of these right, but we can read here that he used a combination of artificial aids such as ladders and ropes. Fucking aid. So this guy was like the OG Gumby. This is the godfather of all Gumbies, the first person to be like, oh, why climb at the rock when we can use the bigger ladder? So we fast forward 400 years to 1892 when an absolute legend amongst rock climbers, Oscar Eckenstein, hosted the inaugural, one and only, first ever bouldering competition. No pads, no chalk, no fucking flat bills, right? Just hard men doing hard boulders. Although most evidence points that like the hardest boulder here is probably like V2, but it's 1892. Cut him a little bit of slack. But it wasn't until the 1940s that we saw the first official climbing competitions hosted by none other than the Soviet Union. They called them the Hunger Games. You want a loaf of bread? You better send that V4. And in the 80s and 90s, we saw the rise of what we see now as modern climbing competitions, right? Bouldering comps, lead comps, all the fun stuff that you see today. And while these competitions may have differed here and there, they all had two things in common: crimps and overhang. If you weren't climbing on crimps and overhang, you weren't a competitive climber. But what about the slab climbing? Fuck you, you fucking pussy. You thought the men in the original bouldering competition were hard? These men were even harder. They were so hard it hurts, all right? Small holds and overhang climbing. Every year, the same thing, until something changed in the year 2007. And that change was the introduction of IFSC.
Maybe able to find a top here. Oh, this is climbing from another planet from Samoa Narasaki. That, show them that. That was incredible. That was incredible from Samoa Narasaki.
Now, while there's no one universal definition for a dyno, the most commonly accepted definition for a dyno comes from the highest entity in rock climbing, the ChurchofDynology, which defines a dyno as any dynamic movement. Although the actual term dyno is more commonly used to refer to a move where all four limbs come off the rock climbing wall, right? All four limbs are off the wall at the same time before you come back onto the wall. So basically, it's a jump. The only real exception to this is the throw, which is a dyno, but you leave one hand on the wall while you jump. This is commonly referred to as the coward's dyno. Take your hand off the wall. This isn't a public restroom. Now, needless to say, when IFSC was first introduced, dynos weren't really that popular. Sure, people knew about them. As a matter of fact, the founder, the godfather of bouldering, John Gill, actually was a very dynamic climber. And while he did popularize bouldering, he didn't really popularize dynos. And this was in the 1950s, so why now? Why in 2007 is everyone dynoing all over the place in these IFSC comps, right? Like, what changed? Well, look at this. That shit's badass. And the truth of the matter is, big moves equal a big crowd. And this is true across every sport. People don't watch NFL to see the fucking field goals, all right? People watch the NFL to see somebody get paralyzed out on the field, right? The audience are a bunch of animals. They want to see home runs. They want to see car crashes. And rock climbing is no different.
Are you not entertained?
Every year, IFSC gets bigger. Bigger crowds, bigger holds, bigger dynos. And let's be honest, the dynos are kind of getting out of control. Now, if we're being fair, only 1 or 2 out of 4 boulders in each comp are actually dynos. So it's not like every boulder is a dyno boulder now. But the whole point of climbing competitions is to see who the strongest rock climber is. And that means that comp climbing should, in some way, replicate outdoor rock climbing. And Mother Nature isn't setting Lachey dynos, right? This shit doesn't exist outside. Mother Nature is a trad dad. And this has given rise to the term comp style, right? Where you look at a boulder that's really big holds and really dynamic, and people describe it as a comp style boulder, meaning it doesn't actually replicate outdoor rock climbing, it replicates competition climbing. Which leads to the question, are dynos ruining rock climbing? Fuck no, this shit finally got interesting. Now this is the part where I give you my opinion on why comp climbing or dynos aren't ruining rock climbing. And I just wanted to preface that this whole thing is an opinion piece, right? The whole build up to this point was to describe to you the rising issue of dynos and rock climbing. It may not all be correct information. I'm not a journalist. This is just based on my own limited research. I'm sure some of you are gonna have your own things like, oh, actually, Billy Bob Thornton popularized dynos back in the 70s and you completely mischaracterized comp climbing and the Soviet Union actually did feed its people. I'm just here to tell you the two main reasons why I don't think that dynos are ruining rock climbing, starting with the first reason, which is skill merging. When people look at these comp style dynos and say, this is just parkour, my main argument to disagree with that would be that it's not just parkour, it's merging parkour into rock climbing. And my argument defending this is that there are no parkour pros that could send any competition climbs in an IFSC World Cup. I can almost guarantee that there is a 0% chance, unless they also happen to be able to climb at a professional level, which would then defeat the argument that it's just parkour. And I know some of you will probably point out like, oh, well, Toby Seeger did Rainbow Rocket, which is a V11 dyno, which is around the same grade that they set at IFSC World Cup. So clearly he can dyno at a professional level. But the difference between Toby Seeger sending Rainbow Rocket and completing a comp climb at IFSC is the fact that after the dyno, there would be more V11 static climbing moves for him to do afterward. He would still have to send the second half of the boulder, which is most likely going to be a V11 static climb. And this is where I find the skill merging concept cool, right? Because it's not just how good you are at one thing. You're starting to see people have to blend skills together. Now, you obviously don't want too much skill merging in a competition, otherwise it just becomes a game show, right? Where it's like, you send the first half of the boulder, then somebody throws you a baseball and you have to hit a target with it, and then backflip through a hula hoop, and then dyno to the top of the boulder. It's like, there's too much going on. But dynos are actually applicable in outdoor rock climbing, so they fit the sport well. Like, there are times that you can dyno to skip parts of an outdoor boulder, or some outdoor boulders you have to dyno to send. So it's a real skill set that is actually applicable. Is this a little bit more than you would typically find outside? Yeah, I think we can agree on that. But it is pretty entertaining to watch. And the second reason that I don't think that dynos are ruining rock climbing is probably my stronger argument, which is variety. Think about how many different types of climbing there are. Just in comp climbing alone, you have speed, lead, and bouldering. And then you talk about outdoor climbing, you have sport climbing, bouldering, trad climbing, deep water solo climbing. And a lot of these are significantly different than one another. Like slab climbing and overhang climbing aren't even like relative to one another. They're like completely different sports essentially. One of them's just a lot cooler than the other one. And if you break down all three sections of competition climbing, you actually see this variety mixed pretty well, where you have speed climbing, which is just dynoing up a wall as fast as possible. You have lead climbing, which is mostly static climbing, and then you have bouldering, which is a mix of the two. So if you really are like a static climbing purist, that's basically all they do in the lead climbing. And if you really just love dynos, like really like dynos, like even more than me, speed climbing's for you, right? That you're gonna see a lot of dynos in speed climbing. But the reason that bouldering is my favorite is because it's just the perfect mix of the two. Like, you can't just be good at dynos to be a good boulderer. And at least when it comes to competition climbing, you can't just be good at static climbing. You gotta be able to dyno also. I also don't see why you would even want indoor climbing to be an exact replica of outdoor climbing. Like, why would you want two of the exact same thing? Like, it's outdoor climbing, but inside. Like, the NFL used to literally just be rugby, right? But they started letting people make changes to the rules, and eventually in 1906, they started letting people throw the ball forward, dyno the ball forward. That is super relevant. Let you throw the ball forward, which was super controversial at the time, but you let people get used to it, some time passes, now you got two really cool different sports. So overall, no, I don't think that dynos are ruining rock climbing. I think the only way that dynos would actually be ruining rock climbing is if people are going outside and chiseling away the rock on actual climbs to make it so you had to do dynos on them. Besides that, that's my unbiased opinion on why dynos are not ruining rock climbing. This message has been brought to you by the Church of Dynology.